y'all, Dixie here. Today I'm gonna get a little bit morbid and talk about 13 of the most common ways to die while backpacking, but I'm hoping to be encouraging with this message as I'm also going to address ways to mitigate those risks. I use several different sources for the information in this video, and I will link to those in the video description, but let's get started. These aren't necessarily going to be in order from most common to least common, except for this first one, because the number one cause of death in the wilderness is falling. Gravity can bring you to your demise, whether it's a steep snowfield or a narrow pass, maybe a gravelly ledge or a bit of overconfidence. I'm sure the numbers of falls in the backcountry over time has probably increased. I don't know that for sure, but with social media becoming more and more popular over time, people trying to inch out to the ledge to get that perfect selfie can end up in a disastrous situation. So obviously the best way to prevent a situation where you find yourself falling is to be aware of your surroundings, to watch your footing, and to not do something that you don't feel completely comfortable with. I definitely would not get in the habit of trusting wet rocks, mossy areas, or gravelly sloped ledges, because anything like that that could cause you to lose your traction while being next to a ledge is best avoided. It's always good to check the weather before you go backpacking, but especially if you know you're going to be on areas where there's a drop off, some sort of ledge, or the edge of cliffs, then it's probably good to make sure you're not going to be in extremely rainy weather or windy weather, which could contribute to a fall. Common way to die number 2 is drowning. This could be from river crossings or possibly even crossing ice or snow. I know when I was in the Sierra on the Pacific Crest Trail, we did have a lot of scary water crossings, but also going over snow bridges with flowing water underneath, you really had to watch your footing and try to make sure that you were crossing in an area that had the thickest amount of ice or snow. So it's just another one of those things that situational awareness when crossing snow and ice is best, and if you don't feel comfortable with the situation, turn around and try it another day. With water crossings, I've made multiple videos where I talk about the safest way to ford a water crossing, and basically you want to make sure that you're pointing upstream, because if you're facing downstream, then the force of the water flowing against your legs, especially if it's hitting the backs of your knees, can buckle your legs and cause you to fall into the water. It can be easy to get a little overwhelmed and try to rush it, but being slow and steady is much better than trying to get across too fast and slipping and falling. You want to make sure that you've got one foot planted well before you pick up the next one. Get a good plant with that foot, and then you pick up the next one. In my opinion, having trekking poles definitely helps with water crossings. It just gives you 4 legs instead of 2, and it helps me feel a little bit more secure. They say that you should unbuckle your hip belt strap and your sternum strap on your pack. That way, if you do fall into the water, you can ditch out of your pack and it doesn't stay on you, and the buoyancy kind of push your face down into the water and assist in drowning you. There are 2 schools of thought on this that kind of butt heads. In my opinion, when I unbuckle my hip belt and my sternum strap, it causes me to feel a little off balance because I'm so used to how the weight carries on my back. So now if I'm focusing so much on my footing, I might not be thinking about how the weight is hanging on me, and that could cause me to fall. So it's really a personal preference, whatever you prefer. Both ideas make sense to me. I've been in situations where I've definitely unbuckled, but I've also been in situations where I've kept myself strapped in and just known, hey, if I fall down, I need to unbuckle super quickly. Also, if you find yourself down in the water, not only do you want to get rid of your pack, but you also want to flip onto your back and have your feet out in front of you. That way you can push off of any rocks that you're gonna come upon instead of your head going downstream first and hitting the rocks. And then of course, when it's safe to do so, find a way to get to the bank and get out of the water. Another situation in which you can drown on trail that people might not really think about is when you're hiking in a canyon and there's some significant rainfall, it can flood a canyon very quickly. So it's a good idea to check the weather before you go. And also you want to avoid camping in a wash. I was told to avoid this when I went out west to the Pacific Crest Trail and also the Continental Divide Trail, because it might not be raining right where you're at, but if you're camped in that wash and some rainfall somewhere in the distance comes rushing down that wash, it can kill you pretty quickly. Heart attacks. This seems to stay in at least the top 5 reasons or ways that people die in the outdoors. A lot of the time it seems to be men in their 50s or above who try to keep up with the goals and the stamina they had in their 30s and below. This seems especially common for people who live at lower elevations and then go and climb some strenuous peak at a fast pace. Some of the ways that you can prevent having a heart attack in the backcountry is, first off, get your ticker checked, especially if you're in that age range of 50 and above. I've got heart disease history in my family, so I go once a year and get mine checked up on, so there is no shame in that. I guess it makes sense that heart attacks would be at the top of this list because heart disease is the #1 reason globally that people die. It's important to listen to your body and go at a pace that is comfortable for you, to not try to keep up with people that you see around you, because it's important for you to enjoy yourself and make sure that you get home safely. And there's no reason why you can't do those 14ers or still have awesome goals, but make sure that you're training for it. This is something that I'm doing for myself now that I'm in my mid-30s. I'm trying to make sure I stay in a training process in between hikes instead of sitting on the couch real hard and then going to climb that 14er. Another common way to die in the backcountry is hypothermia. That's why I always recommend, especially for beginners, that you start getting experience backpacking in 3-season weather. So spring, depending on where you're at, maybe late spring, summer, early fall. That way, when you make mistakes, you don't have to worry about some of those mistakes possibly leading to hypothermia, or at least you're reducing your risk of hypothermia. You can still experience hypothermia in the summer months, for example, but it's less common than when you're backpacking in the winter months. It is important to recognize symptoms of hypothermia so you can help somebody else, or maybe you can recognize it in yourself and try to do something about it before it becomes life-threatening. You might notice shivering, slurred speech or mumbling, slow, shallow breathing, a weak pulse or clumsiness or lack of coordination, confusion, drowsiness or low energy, and then finally loss of consciousness. It's definitely a good idea to have some source of creating heat, whether that's a way to build a fire, maybe hand warmers or all of the above, extra clothing to make sure you can bundle up, or if you end up wet and cold, having a change of clothing. And being able to drink a warm liquid does wonders to help warm you up from the inside out. And also it's important to get some calories in you if you think that you might be suffering from hypothermia, so your body can have that food to help warm yourself up. On the other side of hypothermia is heat exhaustion. The symptoms of heat exhaustion might include a headache, dizziness and confusion, a lack of appetite or feeling sick, excessively sweating and pale, clammy skin, cramps in the arms, legs or stomach, fast breathing or a rapid pulse, and of course being very thirsty. If you think you or somebody else is suffering from heat exhaustion, of course the best thing that you can do is try to escape the heat however you can, cool yourself or them off as best as possible, and hydrate. Of course, it's better to prevent heat exhaustion than to be in a situation where you're having to treat it. So if you can avoid hiking in those hotter temperatures in the middle of the summer, in really exposed areas, or even if you're gonna hike in the summertime, maybe avoid hiking in the heat of the day. You can hike in the early morning, then take a little break in the shade for the prime heat of the day, and then start hiking again in the evenings and into the night. It is said that you can acclimate your body and train for heat and hiking in hotter temperatures. So if you know you're going to be going somewhere where there will be higher temperatures than what you're used to, I would definitely look into that. But one of the most important things that you can do is to make sure that you stay well hydrated, that you don't get in a situation where you're out on trail and you're like, man, I figured it's a hiking trail, I would find some kind of water out here and I didn't bring enough. Always research well in advance what the water situation will be like for the time of year that you're going to go out there. You can check in apps like Far Out if you're going to be doing hikes along the bigger, more established trails like the Appalachian Trail, Pacific Crest Trail, Continental Divide Trail, etc. Also, the All Trails app will sometimes have some comments and information in it about specific hikes. And you can also check Facebook for groups that have been created around certain trails that might be local to you or to where you're planning to go, and ask some of those people, those trail enthusiasts, about the water situation out there. But don't guess, make sure you know what to expect and when you'll come across water sources, and make sure that they will be flowing. And if you don't want to carry the amount of water that you're going to need for, say, a day hike, if you know there will be water out there, you can bring a filter so you don't have to pack all of that weight, but just know that you'll have access to water so you don't end up in a position where you're now having to treat heat exhaustion. The next common way to die in the backcountry is dehydration. It's always easier to prevent dehydration than to reverse dehydration. And you don't only need to worry about hydration when it's hot. I have a problem with not drinking when it's cold out and I end up dehydrating myself because I don't want cold liquid on the inside when I'm cold on the outside. So I really have to tell myself and remind myself to stay hydrated when it's cold out. So if you're that type of person too, watch for that. It's important to also try to get some sort of electrolytes in you. They have different tablets and mixes that you can add to your water to make it taste a little bit better, and also to make sure that you're replacing the electrolytes that are being depleted while you're active in the outdoors. And finally, make sure that you're either carrying water that's safe to drink or that you've got some way to filter or treat it while you're in the backcountry, because drinking water that has been contaminated with something that can upset your stomach might cause vomiting and diarrhea, which greatly contributes to dehydration. Next is lightning. Now, I've read that the majority of lightning deaths in the US don't actually happen in the backcountry, but it does happen. I've had some what I would call butthole pucker moments on the trail with lightning, some near misses, and a lot of people will say, well, why would you be up there if you know there's a storm? Well, sometimes these storms will roll in quicker than you can get down off the mountain. So while you still might find yourself in a sketchy situation, there are ways to try to prevent that as much as possible. First, it's helpful if you descend from above tree line somewhere between noon and 2 p.m. because after that point is when it seems the storms like to roll in the mountains most frequently anyway. However, regardless of the time of the day, if you do see a black cloud rolling in, either don't ascend the mountain, or if you're already up there, get down as soon as possible. If you're hiking with a group, it's a good idea to split up and spread out. That way, if part of the group gets struck by lightning, hopefully the whole group isn't incapacitated and they can help one another. Avoid seeking shelter under a single tall tree because those tall points in an open area seem to be where lightning wants to strike the most. Also, avoid rock outcroppings and caves. While you're out there and you're in a situation where you've got a storm rolling up, it might seem like, hey, there's this nice cave that I can hide in, but actually lightning can strike you there too. It's honestly best to just try to get as low in elevation as you can and look for something like a gully or a ditch. And also, it never hurts to know CPR and first aid in the backcountry, especially if you wind up in a situation where somebody's been struck by lightning. That way you can help them. Another way to die in the outdoors is by avalanche. Now, this isn't as common or worrisome if you're hiking in 3-season weather, spring, summer, and fall. But if you're going to be out trekking in the backcountry in the winter, then I would highly recommend getting some avalanche training. And when traversing snowy slopes, keep in mind that colder mornings are better than warm afternoons, because that's when things start to melt and get a little bit more unstable. Kind of like with the lightning situation, if you think that you might be at risk for an avalanche, then you can spread out as a group, staying maybe 100 to 200 feet apart. That way, hopefully one person can help the other, or at least go for help if there's a situation of an avalanche occurring. But of course, the best thing that you can do to prevent being in an avalanche is to avoid unstable slopes altogether. Another common killer in the outdoors is being lost. Now, obviously, the act of being lost doesn't just make you fall over and die, but not being found or finding your way back can lead to issues of overexposure, dehydration, starvation, etc. The first thing I recommend on the topic of getting lost is to always make sure you have the 10 essentials of hiking with you. I'll put a link to a video of where I've covered those in detail for people who are going out on day hikes, because sometimes you might just think you're going out for the day, but you end up in a situation where now you're required to stay overnight because you don't know exactly where you are or how to get back to where you came from. Having your bases covered with some bare minimum things can help give you so much peace of mind if you find yourself in that situation, because you go, okay, this is not ideal, but I did plan for this situation in case it were to happen, and now here I'm in it, and I'm glad that I have these things to help me now with my unplanned overnight stay. Make sure before you go out on a hiking or backpacking trip that somebody who's not going with you knows your plan. They know when you're leaving, they know exactly where you're going, your planned route, and when you expect to return home. That way, if they don't hear from you at the designated time, then they can call in search and rescue to go find you. Before you hit the trail, make sure that you study the map of where you're going. Kind of check out some different landmarks or things that you might see. That way, when you're out there on the ground and you see whatever landmark, you're like, okay, I have an idea of where I'm at right now in reference to everything else, because those little things can help you find yourself again if you end up lost. As you're walking out on the actual trail, spot those landmarks and try to get a reference point for where you're at different times during your hike. I like to take a lot of pictures, and I've always thought about that if I were to find myself misplaced in the outdoors, I could look back at some of the pictures and go, okay, at this time of day, I could see this rock outcropping at this angle, so that's where I came from. So thinking about stuff like that and just trying to make a mental note while you're hiking is a good idea. You can also watch the clock, know what time you started hiking at a certain point in the day, or by lunch you had already gone 5 miles or whatever. That way you have an idea if you end up not where you think you should be, about how many miles you've done since the last point that you knew where you were. I always like to have some sort of GPS app on my phone, and I know that you can lose your phone, so it is good to have a backup source of navigation or an in-reach device or personal locator beacon so you could call for help if you do lose your main source of navigation. But having an app on my phone that shows me exactly where I'm located in reference to the trail is just very comforting to me, because I can use that to navigate myself back. So when I stop to take a bathroom break, even if I drop my pack off at the trail and then wander into the woods, I make sure that I have my phone with me, so I always have that navigation tool. If you do realize that despite your best efforts you have ended up lost, the first thing that you can do is think of the acronym STOP. First, S, sit down, take a breather, try to relax and not panic. T, think. Try to remember what were the last landmarks you saw, what time of day was it when you last knew exactly where you were, about how much time has passed, how many miles have you done. O, observe your surroundings. Does anything around you look familiar, or could something around you possibly be a reference point to help you to return to where you last were? And then P, try to figure out some kind of plan going forward and be as methodical as you can with how you're going to go forward, but try to keep the spot where you realized you were lost as a reference point if you don't have any other reference point. So at least you know you could come back to that exact spot. If you feel like you're just making things worse and you're in a panicked state, there's no shame in staying put where you are as long as it's a safe location and setting up some sort of camp for the night, because that person that you gave all of your information to will hopefully, like you discussed, contact search and rescue if you're not back by the designated time you said you would be, and if you stay put, sometimes it's easier for search and rescue to find you that way instead of putting yourself in a more dangerous situation. Next is falling trees and rocks. Obviously, in this instance, situational awareness is your best bet to avoid losing your life to a rock or a tree / limb. When I set up camp, I try to make a point to look above me and make sure I don't see any what we call widow makers, which is a dead limb or a dead tree that looks like it could fall at any point. And I've had instances where I have set up and then seen the dead limb and I still move, because it's definitely worth the trouble to relocate my camp than to lose my life. Also, if you notice some loose rock that looks like it could have tumbled down from somewhere when you're setting up camp, try to see if there's a certain place that that's coming from and avoid setting up in that path, because the last thing that you want is to be dreaming wonderful dreams and get knocked in the head with a rock. Next is altitude sickness, or what I like to call elevation sickness. Most cases of altitude sickness are pretty mild. Maybe you feel some shortness of breath or sluggishness, but this can turn into more serious issues if you're not careful, like high altitude pulmonary or cerebral edema, which means fluid in the lungs or swelling of the brain, respectively. So if you notice symptoms like headache, exhaustion, loss of appetite, nausea, confusion, or lightheadedness, then you want to do like Arnold says and get down. You can always go climb that mountain another day, as long as you make sure that you live to do it another day. There are some things that you can do though to try to prevent altitude sickness before you get out there, or even as you're out there. For example, if you live at a lower elevation like I do here in Alabama, where I'm below 1,000 feet, and you're planning to go on a trip like to Colorado, I'm planning to go to Colorado later this month, then when you get there, maybe sleep at that higher elevation for a night or two before you ever go backpacking. So I plan to fly into Colorado. I'm gonna stay for 2 nights before I go out on my trip, because below 1,000 feet and 5,000 feet is a difference, and so slowly acclimating yourself can definitely help. Also, when you're actually on your trip, going up gradually is good if possible. And I plan, if possible, to try to sleep at the lower elevation. So even though I might be climbing up to over 12,000 feet, maybe that first night I'm not going to try to hang out up there and sleep up there. I'll just climb up and then get down to a lower elevation to make camp. If you can, on your trip where you're going to be at higher elevations, start with lower mileage and then build yourself up to higher miles once you get towards the end of your trip, so you give your body time to acclimate. And then also stay hydrated the best you can, and maybe hold off on the alcohol a little bit. And then of course it always helps if you can train before you go. Although it's not even near the top of the list on ways to die in the backcountry, there are people who have died from being poisoned while out on trail. Maybe some of y'all have either seen the movie or read the book Into the Wild about the Chris McCandless story, where he decided to disappear into the Alaskan wilderness and live out there. So he was foraging, and unfortunately he misidentified a berry and ended up poisoning himself, which ultimately led to his death. The best way to prevent yourself from being poisoned is to not put anything in your mouth that you're not 100% sure you have identified correctly. If you're going to be out there on a backpacking trip and you're not trying to like forage and live in the woods, then just make sure you carry enough food so you don't feel forced to eat something that you have possibly misidentified. And finally, wildlife. Now, I feel like this one is the top one that people stress about before they go out into the wilderness, which is funny because it's really not that common at all for somebody to die from being attacked by wildlife. It does happen occasionally though, so it's definitely a good idea before you go on a backpacking trip to research the area that you're going to find out what wildlife you might encounter and how to respond to any sort of attacks. If you're going to be in black bear country or grizzly country, or in an area that has venomous snakes, just knowing how to handle those situations and those encounters is always a good idea. I've got videos on the channel for different wildlife that I've encountered here in the US, but if you're going somewhere like Australia where everything's trying to kill you like you're in the game Jumanji, I can't really help you with that, so make sure you do your research and know what you're getting yourself into. All right, y'all, well, that is all I have for you today. I hope that you found this video more encouraging than discouraging. If you think about it, in normal everyday life, there are so many ways that people end up dying. So getting in the backcountry and getting that exercise, trying to keep yourself healthy and in good shape is a good idea. So even though there are risks associated with the backcountry, getting out there and exercising, trying to keep yourself in good shape, I think is worth the risk, especially with all of the mental, physical, and emotional good spending time in the outdoors does for us. And it should give you peace of mind to know that there are ways to prevent or mitigate the risk of the most common ways to die while backpacking. If you found this video useful, don't forget to subscribe before you go, and we will see y'all next time.